Hi, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Welcome back to the Power of 1 Million webinar series with the beautiful Jamila.
Thank you.
We are so excited to have you guys back with us again. Please put into the chat where you are calling in from. And then this time, y'all, can I get a couple people to take some selfies of yourself at work listening to this webinar? Because I know that some of you guys are probably sitting at your desk. Take your lunch out. Take some time. I'll give you a couple minutes to get your lunch. You can kind of listen to this and eat while you're listening. And everybody says, "Hey, hello, everybody. Welcome back." And we see Philly, Chicago, and some of you guys. What industries are you working in right now? Because I know this is a lunch and learn, so some of you guys are at work. Can I see a few of you guys? Like, what industries are you in? Hello, hello. I'm seeing cities, Michigan, Alabama. Hey, y'all. Hey. Oh, nice. I see the owner of Her LLC. Welcome. Federal government, healthcare, virtual support, retired and bored. Okay, Cheryl, got you.
Nice.
Legal, nice. Commercial real estate, wonderful nonprofit, nursing, school board accountant, nice. For New Orleans, hey, girl. Hey, Naisha, wonderful. Bridal retail industry. Oh, this is wonderful. I'm so glad to see who you guys are because then that'll help us to know too, like how we can serve you better. Because this conversation, as you guys know, so I started the Power of 1 Million so that we could be exposed to people who have reached a million. Because many of us, we couldn't even think of a million of anything. We couldn't think of $1 million, a million downloads, a million videos. That just seemed like some big number way out there. But now we're getting a chance to actually talk to entrepreneurs and people that have reached a million. So in our first discussion, we talked to Danielle Leslie, and she's reached a million through teaching other people how to share their story. Then we talked to Danielle Pierce, and she reached a million. She reached 3 million by doing housing preservation. So she does contracts with different um, cities, and they let her reserve the homes. And so now we are speaking to Jamila Souffrant, and she's going to teach us how to get a million downloads. She has had a wonderful podcast, which I love, and she has reached a million downloads. So welcome, Jamila. Welcome to the webinar series.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Teri, for having me. I know this is a little different because we're talking about downloads versus like money, but the mindset still applies either way.
Yes. And you know what? It's 4 minutes in. I think people have had time to get their lunch. So let's go ahead and get started. Will you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm Jamila, born in Jamaica, the island, not the borough. Nothing wrong with anyone if you're from Queens, but I'm born in the beautiful island of Jamaica. So what's up to my Caribbean fam if you're watching? Also, I came here as a little girl. Kind of like that story that most immigrant children like have. So came born in Jamaica, came here, was raised and really just nurtured by a single mom who was really young when she had me at 20, which I can't even imagine because I'm in my 30s. I have 3 kids and a husband, and I'm still just surviving day to day. So I don't know how she did it, but super blessed to have the kind of mom that I had because despite her predicament or surroundings or whatever was against her, like she prevailed and taught me how to do the same. And so I watched her like work really hard, which helped to instill this work ethic that I have now in my mindset. So I just got to give praise to her. And so I've always been interested in money. So me, Jamila Souffrant, right now, as of today, I'm a mom of 3 small kids, 5, 3, and 1 years old. I'm a wife, and I'm a recent, I would say, full-time entrepreneur. So Journey to Launch is my business. It's a personal finance platform that helps people reach financial freedom. And the main source of media that I have right now is the podcast. So I put a podcast out every Wednesday for going on, well, it'll be a 3-year anniversary in July. So it's about 2.5 years now that I've had the podcast. And I talk all about reaching financial freedom and independence because it's super important to me to share my journey to reach it because I'm well on my way there. personally, but also to share this knowledge with my journeyers. So if you are familiar with my content, I call people who are on this journey with me journeyers. And so essentially I am distilling maybe concepts that you once didn't even know existed, because I sure didn't know financial independence was a thing. And we can talk about what that is in a bit, but like bringing it into a way in which it's like super relatable. You can consume it. It's entertaining for the most part. It's not boring. That's what I do with my content, is to make financial freedom accessible for more people.
Oh my gosh, this is going to be so exciting. This is going to be exciting. Now tell me this real quick before we even jump into the million discussion. Coming from a single parent and coming from a immigrant background, do you feel like people in those situations think that achieving $1 million is achievable?
I think it's harder. It depends on your natural. It depends on. It's like that nurture versus nature kind of thing. I think sometimes people are innately, like, like the rose that grew out of concrete. Like innately, you don't need to see it. Like you just innately have a drive to do more than anything around you has ever done, right? Like, so you can have that versus sometimes it is a lot of nature, like what's around, nurture, like what's around you, like what do you see? And so I think it can be hard for some people if they don't see it as an example of like what wealth looks like, what a successful business looks like if no one around you has done it. Which is why it's so important for me to show people like this can be done. Like there are people with even like just regular 9 to 5s, like really optimizing their finances and becoming millionaires. So I'm excited to like show other people like how you can do that.
And how can they do that? Like, I know that's a big question, but is it possible? I know I saw a message from you in one of like I think it was Instagram or email something, and you were like, "Is it attainable? Is financial independence really attainable? Is it?"
So I think it means something different to everyone, like your level of what freedom means, right? There are some people who are just like happy in a, just small home and like modest car, and all they need to do is like be able to feed themselves and their kids, and they're happy 100%. There's some people maybe with bigger dreams, not that they have to be better dreams, but just bigger things where maybe they want to never work again and travel the world first class, right? So your idea of what financial freedom is going to be dependent on what makes you content and how much money you need to live that life you want to live. And there's no wrong answer, honestly, of what that looks like. I think that when I talk about financial independence in the technical terms, it means that you have enough money, you've acquired enough money in your portfolio and investing strategies, and whether it's like passive income through real estate or investing, you don't have to work again. Like you literally can sit back and chill and you get basically money from your portfolio. I think that's attainable for people, but it can be hard depending on your starting point. Like if you have a lot of debt, depending on when you start. So it's not to deter anyone from trying to get to that level, because I always say that's a moon goal, meaning it's like an amazing goal to strive for. And if you even fail, right? So let's just say you decide, oh, I need like 2 million to like have a portfolio that works for me, that I don't have to work again. Mm-hmm. And you try, and then in 10 years, you get to 1 million. Like you're still doing better than most people and what you would have done before you got started. So I say like, shoot for the moon, and you may end up in the stars, but you'll end up in such a better place. So financial independence as a technical term, I think is a little harder for a lot of people to get to, but financial freedom, I think, is a mindset. Obviously there are some, there's money that involves that, but you can still be working towards financial freedom, unlock different levels of financial freedom in your life, no matter where you are. You don't have to have $1 million to do that. It's a mindset. It's the way you feel about money. It's your how you attract money into your life. It's how you invest in yourself. So all that to me equates to financial freedom, and anyone can do that from wherever they are.
Nice. Okay. And so I want to ask you about $1 million. I do see a couple people saying that your video is still blurry. You guys see it better now? As you came forward, though, it seemed to me to get a little clearer.
Like
is that better for you guys? Y'all can tell us in the chat. Can y'all see Jamila a little better now?
Does it look a little bit better?
Yeah, y'all let us know in the chat. We're gonna keep going, but y'all let us know. Hopefully that made it a little clearer. It's clearer to me now, Jamila. So maybe you stay close.
You'll see all my like.
Everybody's like, yeah, good, yes, I can see her. Wonderful. Ooh, the smile is so cute. Okay. So tell us this then. How did you reach 1 million downloads? Like, what did you do to get to that goal?
So I will say this. So for the podcast, so when I first started Journey to Launch, I legit was more doing it as a blog, as a means to be accountable to someone, like the two people who were reading the blog at the time. And I want to take it back because this may inspire you if you right now have a thought or an idea. But I remember I was commuting from Brooklyn to New Jersey, and I was pregnant with my first son. And what really prompted me or got me excited was I knew I was sick of the commute. And I said to myself, like, I need to find out a way to like escape this. Like, I don't want this to be my life. And I was pregnant with my first son on a horrible, like really bad commute, where it took me like 4 hours that like one way, and I was pregnant. So I was not having it. And I decided at that moment, like, I was going to figure something out. Like, if I had to win the lottery, if I had to do I don't know. I was just going to figure something out. And so I started Googling how to quit my job, like all the stuff that maybe some of you guys have done before, how to retire early before I even knew that was like a thing. And I came across blogs and podcasts that were talking about this. And so then I started to listen to these podcasts on my long commute to work. And I just got fired up about, wow, these people, I was listening to teachers like save millions of dollars in years, pay off debt. I was like, if they can do this, I
Like
can.
me.
I was like, oh, I got to figure something else out. Like, so it's prompted me to start Journey to Launch to kind of like chronicle that journey. I was going to say, this is how I'm going to retire early, which really meant just quit my corporate job by the time I was 40 years old. So Journey to Launch started as that premise where I'm going to share my journey and see what happens. And then as I started sharing my journey, more people got interested, especially when I stepped from behind. So when my first, like if you scroll, I don't even know if it's still there, but if you scroll all the way back in my Instagram account for Journey to Launch, a lot of it started out as just like words. Like I never really showed my face. So that's another thing that we can talk about being, stepping out from behind like the shadows and not being, and stepping into not being afraid of what people think. Because once I started to really share more about me, like my more personal story, and not too personal where it was like, you know, it was too uncomfortable, but that's when people really started to get interested because they're like, oh, this girl looks like me. She talks like me. Like people really got connected to that. So the blog then transitioned into the podcast because I was writing blog posts every week and it would take me forever to write the blog post. And I was like, oh my gosh, maybe I should do a podcast because I listened to so many of them. Like I've listened to podcasts on 1.5 times. So podcast listeners, you can speed up your rate of how you listen and then get through more content. So on my 2 to 3 hour commute every day, I was listening to personal finance podcasts, mindset podcasts. I was just like consuming it all. And so I said, maybe I can talk through my thoughts and my journey. And the crazy thing about it, or I think the cool thing about it is when you are consuming things and you're getting inspired by it, it also allows you to see what's missing. So as I was listening to all these other podcasts, I was like, there's no one who looks like me, that talks like me. They're kind of talking to the same people. And I was like, I know if more people like my friends and family and just my community knew about this, like that this was possible, like this would be exciting for them. And so it kind of gave me the clay, right, to mold, to say, this is what I know I want to build into my podcast. So decided to launch a podcast in July of 2017. But I really knew from then, like what I wanted it to be in terms of the content, the kind of guests. I knew I wanted it to be diverse. I knew I wanted it to be like a mix of solo episodes and then interviews. I knew that I didn't want it to be like the same personal finance people. So I think all those things like led up to like me having like quality content as a podcast. But then, you know, when people ask me like, how did you get to 1 million downloads? Because there are a lot of podcasts like out there and, you know, podcasts is like started every day. For me, I really think like it's a mix of things. I don't think it's just like one thing in general. I think
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Tell us.
So my consistency, I think, helps. So I've released an episode every Wednesday since I started, even when I gave birth. So I think I gave birth to so I've had 3 kids altogether. And I had planned for it by the time I was giving birth to my third, that like an episode would go out. So it was all pre-done. It's not like I was in the hospital recording, but I think my consistency, like I was just like, I'm just going to go. Now I do have different thoughts on that. Like, I'm not saying that, if, you know, you have a lot going on in your life, you don't have to, you know, do that. But for me, that worked for me because it just get the momentum going. I also think you need a mix of just quality content. Like the content has to be good, because if people find you, they have to want to stick with you and like grow with you. So you just have to have good quality content, but you also have to like market it. Like people have to know about it. So creating allies within your industry and outside of your industry helps. So people refer you, and then creating content that like people actually want to share, like journeyers and listeners want to share with people who are not even like listening. Right. So I think it's a mix of having good content, consistency, and then allies within my space that share my content with their people, with their audiences, and then the kind of like bigger media stuff, which has helped a lot when I've gotten featured in things, which we can talk about more, because a lot of that happened in February for me with Apple Podcasts when they featured the podcast.
They did. I saw that. I was like, oh my God, that's my friend.
Yeah.
So let's go back. So there's a couple things. One, Colson, so glad that you're here. He's like, oh my gosh, I just started listening to her podcast. Didn't even know she was today's speaker. So welcome. And then Lisa said, what are some of the names of the podcasts that you were listening to?
So
do you remember some?
And I have another thing, because now that I have my own podcast, I rarely listen to other personal finance podcasts anymore, because I want to keep my ideas kind of, sometimes it can be an echo chamber. So any content creators, we can talk about that too, how it's when you first start out, it's good to be allies with people, and you always should be allies and, be giving in that way, but you don't want your relationships, or you don't want to be too influenced by what other people are doing, which that can happen. So when I first started, I was listening to podcasts like Radical Personal Finance with Joshua Sheets. I was listening to the Mad Scientist with Brad. That's really good. And then those were like the two major ones. And then I was reading some blogs about financial independence from Mr. Money Mustache. So these are like more popular, established like sources of information. And then the thing about them was they were all like, white guys.
Right.
And so I was just like, I knew there were some other like voices out there, but none at the level in which I knew I could grow my brand to when I started to get serious about it, that could impact people the way I knew I could impact people.
That's so true. Because I think a lot of people get scared to do things because they're like, there's so many things out there, but nobody's voice is the same as your voice. So them seeing you're a Black woman, you're an immigrant, this is your first in a lot of ways. Like to hear you talk about this, like makes all the difference, because a lot of people don't see people like us. Like that's why we're doing it, to inspire like our generation, our women, men, people of color, young. Like there are so many things that we can inspire, and our voice is unique. So that is so true.
Yeah, and I do want to make note that, so for my podcast, I have very diverse guests. So, and it is by design that I do that, meaning because I learn from everyone. So in terms of, I think what resonates with a lot of people is the personal journey. So I feel like people are personally rooting for me to succeed. They've watched like me, like start the podcast and grow the podcast, and witness, the birth of like my daughter in a way. And then they witnessed me quit my job. So the last year was like the first full-time first year of full-time entrepreneurship. And so I feel like not only are people like, maybe some people are following me for the personal finance stuff, they're following me for the actual, like, how is she going to like do this? Like, because if she can do this, like we can do this. So I think that's what helps, is like sharing my personal journey in that regard, that personal side of it. But then with the diversity of guests, it's also because I learned from so many people. Like, I don't care what color you are. I don't care if you were born with a trust fund or dirt poor. Like if there's something I can pick up from you that I can add to my toolbox, I'm going to do that. And so I approach my guests that way. Whereas I think that's what stands out too, because I see like a full picture. And so I've had people like, I've had this guy, he was like a dumpster diver on, which like on the surface, you're just like, what? But I love like doing things like that where it challenges what you think is normal and it makes you see what's possible. So that's the kind of content or things or way I think about things, in which I think helps differentiate it from maybe some other podcasts or people that are doing similar things.
Nice. Now, let's step back a couple seconds. Like you said a couple times that mindset is a big deal. So I have a few questions for you, but let's start here. So you said like we can always step back to the idea of putting yourself in the forefront? Like in the beginning, you just had words. Like, what made you change your mind to start putting yourself out there?
Yeah, so I'll tell you too what exactly was the thing. So I remember when I was starting to save and invest, like I was hearing people save and invest half their income, $100,000 a year. Now, obviously, I do want to say that that is based on your income. Like the more you make, it's easier to save, like, right, 100,000 or 50,000. If you only make 50,000, that's going to be super hard. So I want to acknowledge that. But I saw these people sharing those numbers, and I was like, I get so inspired by that. I know that if I really share like what I'm doing, that will help. And so I remember what happened was after the first year of fully doing like Journey to Launch as a blog and tracking our investing and saving, we'd saved $85,000. And like when I realized that, I was like, I should share this. Like, even though it scared me, because part of like, I think our culture and then my just personal like culture is just like, you don't share things like that. Like, or if you get kidnapped, like anyone wants to kidnap,
Right?
I don't know. Or, like you're just afraid of like what can happen. And honestly, I still have those fears like today a little bit, but not about the kidnapping part, but just about like putting money out there in a way where it seems like, like you're boasting about it when really you're just showing people what's possible. So it's like, when I shared that my husband and I were able to do that in 1 year, that's what really people were like, oh, so wait, like she's like really doing this also. And that really kind of helped. And the responses helped in terms of making me realize that it was the right thing to do, because it inspired people to say, wow, you were like the first person that I saw do something like that, and inspired me that maybe I can't save 85. But I can save like 5,000 more, 500 more than I thought I could. So
Now, I want to ask you a little bit more about the sharing the numbers because, like, I have had that fear before, and I'm getting over it slowly now, like, where I'm more willing to share, like, the numbers that I do in investing. And, like, now I think people are like, oh my God, like, really? Because they didn't know what I was doing behind the scenes. Like, so now that you started sharing those numbers, like, has anybody broken into your house? Like, have any of those fears come true?
no, that's the thing. Like none of that stuff has happened. Like the worst, our mind creates like the worst case scenarios with things, because it's trying to protect you. But none of the things that I thought would happen. Like sure, there've been some like comments or people who don't like believe or might say like, oh, the whole kind of like discrediting or discounting what we've been able to do. But I tend not to focus on that stuff because it's such a small like response to the positive. So yeah, I think you realize that your worst fears like never or hardly come true. So yeah.
Yeah. And Katrina has a great question here. She says, how did you get your husband on board with the journey?
That's a good, very good question. He was on, I wish I remember the episode right off the back. I think it's episode 16. He was on the podcast, like, I think it was episode 16. So I actually talked to him about like how I got him on board, because when I came home with like this wacky idea, like he was just like, what do you like, we're living a good life now, like what are you talking about, right? And he's not very spendy, but he's also more to me like he's in rather the finer things, like not that I don't like him, but I'm just like, yeah, like I can do without if it means I don't have to drive to New Jersey anymore,
Yeah.
Whereas he kind of was not in that mind frame. So what really helped was I would send him like blogs here and there about like, wow, this couple did this couple retired. But what really helped was sitting down, and it took multiple conversations. This was not overnight, where, I talked to him about his goals and our goals and my goals. So like focusing on our goals as a family, where we wanted to be. Like, I presented him with the idea that, let's just say, because he's a teacher, and so he gets to like retire early at 55 a bit, if he wanted to. So I said, okay, let's just say we use 55 as like a benchmark in terms of what kind of life would you want to live then? Would you want to travel, like everything's paid off? Like, and so we talked about what that life looked like. And then we talked about like what our life could look like now that we could enjoy it. So we live in New York. We like going out to eat. How could we balance like having that life we want in the future, but then still enjoying life today? So that started to like, I think, help him feel like his voice was being heard. I wasn't on some like, it's just my way and we got to cut everything out and it has to be right away. I really took the time to let him see like I cared about what his goals were and what he enjoyed. And then numbers. So one of the things I did is we sat down and I showed him a spreadsheet. I created like this spreadsheet where I was able to show him, if we did this, like over the next 10 years, like saved and invested aggressively or paid this off, we'd be worth this much, like, in 10, 15 years, in 2 years. And so for him, I think especially like seeing the numbers, and I think this is true for like a lot of men, like that really was like, oh, and all we have to do is maybe, start a budget and like be more mindful and maybe, just try to earn more money. Like it was just really, I think it made him see what was possible, which got him excited about it.
Now, how did the conversation go then when you decided to quit your job?
Yeah, so that was like another big thing because my income was high. Like I worked in corporate America, so I had a good, I had a good ride or a good job, and I had bonuses. And so what I brought to the table was like a little over half of our household income. So for me to walk away from that and the potential and possibility of like earnings, like guaranteed earnings, right? Like nothing's totally guaranteed, but if I would have stayed at my job, we could have definitely reached our financial independence goals by the time we were 40 years old. Meaning we could have aggressively saved and invested our combined incomes, and then I could have maybe quit indefinitely and not have to think about maybe, starting a business in like a few years. So when I came to him, when I started to realize that like I could not do the commute anymore, I could not, like at that time, so when I really got serious about like quitting my job, I got pregnant with my third. And I thought to myself, like, it's already stressful. The commute, the 2 little kids, plus I know I'm pregnant, I'm going to have another one, and running Journey to Launch. So at this time, Journey to Launch was doing well in terms of the response, which is another thing. Like most people, like they're going to say, which I agree with, make sure you have whatever you're going to like jump into has at least some recurring income. But for me, like it was really like a lot of faith because I knew that the response and what I was able to grow Journey to Launch to in that short amount of time, like I knew if I had more time to focus on it, I can do like a ton more. So bringing that to him was like a lot. It wasn't one conversation. Like I had to get him on board, but I think he saw like the stress and like the toll it was taking for me, because literally it was like something had to go, right? So I had the kids, I had him, I had the job, and I had Journey to Launch. And I was like, well, I don't want to get rid of him.
Right. I'm getting rid of him. I'm getting rid of the kids. Bye, y'all.
The option is I pull back on Journey to Launch and kind of just like chill with it and not go so hard. Or like I can really just like go all in, like, let that go, like the job for now, and focus on Journey to Launch. And so what I like to tell people about financial independence and freedom is this: like we have not reached our like target number where I don't have to bring in money ever again, right? We're not at that point, but because we started this journey, we paid off debt. Like the only debt that we have are our mortgage. And then once I realized that I wasn't going to go back to work, we started to save an FU fund. So if you listen to this week's podcast, we talk about that a lot with my guests, what an FU fund is. It gives you breathing room. It gives you space to like do something different, to take a break. And so I knew that I needed to save up for the huge decrease in our income. So we can cover, because my husband's income doesn't cover everything. So we have to cover expenses. And then I needed to at least make sure Journey to Launch wasn't going to like be too much of a drag on us in terms of like loss of income. So we saved enough so that we could have this little runway I would say like to try this out. So I think once I showed him like that I really was thinking this through, it wasn't like, oh, I'm just going to quit, right? Like we have a mortgage, we have 3 kids, we have a lot like of responsibility. When I showed him that like I was thinking this through, this is the worst case scenario, and that the worst case scenario was like most people's everyday lives, meaning worst case, like say Journey to Launch, like, or whatever I'm doing does nothing, right? Like I'd go back to work, I figure something out. Like even if it wasn't back to my other, like a job or the field I was doing, getting something else. And, I think that's a lot of people's everyday scenario now, is like doing something that they're not necessarily 100% excited for. So I was like, why not? Like, when will I ever feel like all the stars align in this way for me to take this chance? And he just supported that because he knew that I was not going to be able to juggle everything going forward.
And real quick, knowing what's happened since then, will you share with us some of the like amazing things that have happened since you took that leap of faith?
Yeah. So, and part of it is I saw the signs before the leap of faith, right? So that helped with, meaning like internally. So there's going to be times where, you're going to be charged to like take a risk, and you're not going to know exactly how it's going to turn out. But like, I think there are usually signs or affirmations that are happening in like the real world to help you know that. So for me, it was the growth of the podcast and the response from it was helpful in terms of understanding like, no, this is something special here. Like, this is not just like a fluke, or like this has the potential. And then seeing other creators or podcasters, even if they're not in the personal finance space, like what they were able to do with their brands, right? So I would see other people who were more established that had like personal finance or not, just had brands and companies and what they were able to do. And I was just like, why not me? So seeing that helped. So in terms of just like the consistent growth, like, we hit 1 million downloads late last year. So like we're reaching 1.3 million downloads soon. Being featured in things like Money Magazine. This February, I was featured by Apple Podcasts as new and noteworthy, even though it's not new, but I guess it's noteworthy. Black history makers, and I was featured on the top carousel. I also have been doing like speaking gigs, and I partner with select brands to like amplify their message, which is pretty cool. So all those things have been happening, and I know like the trajectory is there, like to continue to make this a sustainable business.
Cool. Now, a few of the audience have questions.
Yeah.
One of them says, and Bukola has asked this twice, so let me make sure to ask her question. But she says, with your success, have you had relatives or family ask you for money, and how did you handle it?
So that's like another, like, I would say fear at first of like, if people know or think you have money, will they depend on you more? Right. And so I haven't really had that. I think one, because my family kind of knows me like already, like, no, like not really, like unless it's like dire need. I'd rather teach you to fish. I'd rather get on the phone with you and show you how to do something than give you money. But no one in my family has like, made me feel or put me on that edge. And again, I think they just, again, a fear that I thought would happen. And also the judgment, like, oh, you got all this money. So even if they're not asking me, right, some of it was internal. Like, even though no one's asking me, are they still expecting it? Because, I'm from Jamaica, so I still have family at home. Like, should I be doing more for everyone else? Like, so there was like a lot of that going on for me. But I've been able to work through that. And I think because, especially now that I'm still actually in the growth phase, especially as a business, like my business is still like in the early stages, still a lot of expenses to, get it, continue its success. I think people like see that, like, even though I don't have to say it. So that hasn't been a problem for me.
And then, Jamila, how do you deal with that fear and judgment? Like, those are emotions that can sometimes paralyze people. Like, what advice would you give people to deal with fear and judgment?
Yeah, so a lot of times it's what we think the other person is thinking. It's not even like a valid, like, usually the person has never even said anything. It can be we are interpreting a look, or not even a look. Like, I consider myself very like sensitive. So sometimes I feel like I can feel how someone is typing something. It's like weird. And you ever get that, you read something and you're like, you envision how the person said it, and you're like, ooh.
Yes.
But it's like, there you go again, making stories in your head. Like, this person, like, you don't know if they said it with an attitude. You don't know any of that. So one, a lot of the stuff that happens, we make up in our head. And we have to ask ourselves, is this true? Is there any evidence? Or are you just doing this because you're scared and your brain is trying to protect you? So I'd say that's like the first step. And then, a good analogy that someone told me, because when it comes to now having a business, you have to feel comfortable like selling and marketing yourself. You have something to sell. And that was hard for me in the beginning. It's still a little hard, but someone said to me, like, imagine that now, like, you are going out, like, you have a family to feed. He was like doing it more like, you're like a wolf or whatever, and you have like, or, you're like a hunter and you have family to feed. Like, you have to go out and get the meat to go back and feed your family. And you're afraid of like the woods and these wolves that you think are in the woods, but you don't know that they're in the woods. Are you just going to sit back and like your family starve? Or are you going to go out there and like do what you have to do? And for me, like, that's actually real, because like now it's like I'm at a time where I have to make this work, or, things may change for like our family or what I'm doing with Journey to Launch. And so that made me feel more confident in like, I'm going to go out there. And besides, when you go out there, you realize like there are no wolves, or that the wolves are actually happy wolves. Like, they're not even trying to eat you.
They're trying to hunt with you. They're trying to help you hunt.
Exactly. So I think think of it that way, where it's like, not assuming the worst out of people, and what you think people are going to think is how you can help that.
Nice, nice. And then that is so true, by the way. Like I think we internalize and we think of all these things without it actually being true at all. And then it stops us from being our best selves because we're like imagining what other people are thinking. So that is so true. I think I'm gonna start saying that. Like I'm gonna write it on my wall. Like, don't be afraid of the wolves. Just go feed your family. Don't let them starve. Like it's so true. And then another question I have for you, because I think this is like something that not only you can answer, but like will be very special to you. But like, so given that you have like made the sacrifices that you've made, and I guess I don't want to jump the answer, but my question is like, what sacrifices do you feel like you've had to make to reach this level?
If like in my personal finances, or just like business, or all that.
I think all that, like even like personal life, family, like, because we've heard so many times, like, oh, you just got to be consistent, or oh, I took a leap of faith. But what sacrifices does that entail?
Yeah. So, like the sacrifice, just the immediate one, is kind of like that guaranteed income, right? Like I was talking about before, like there was a time where every other Friday, or, 15th and 30th of the month, I'd get a check. Like no matter how I did, like at work, really, if I was paying attention or not, like most likely I'd get a check. So giving up that guaranteed income for a more unstable income, not really knowing like what's going to like happen, or what's going to be the thing, right, has been like a sacrifice. But I always say that, the whole goal of financial freedom is, I think what my goal was is actually to live the life I'm living now, which is to not have to be in my car commuting, to take my kids to school every day, to do something I love, which is what I'm doing now, right? So it's like, so kind of that's what made me comfortable kind of doing that. And I'd say the other sacrifices, even when we started to save and invest, was limits around things, which may seem kind of like, oh, but it's a limitation. But like a budget, or AKA spending plan, for me really helped, because it really just gave us a meter on how we were doing, right? So before, we kind of just like spend and then like, oh, kind of figure it out later. And now it was like, no, let's put like some limits around maybe going to restaurants. So we know that if we're approaching that limit and it's the middle of the month, we can make a conscious decision on if we go or not, right? So it's like things like that have helped, but it's like just really being more conscious of how we spend. Like we can definitely probably do a lot more, right? Like in terms of travel and maybe buying things. So some of that stuff is just not feasible like right now. So that's like been a sacrifice, but I'm trying to think what else. I mean, there's so many like along the way. It's like, but I think the benefit of the sacrifice for me is like totally worth it.
Totally outweighs everything.
Yeah.
Now, okay, there's a couple more questions on here. One person asked, what's the strategy to get to 1 million downloads? And I know you mentioned a few things here, but are there any other things that you would say, like if somebody's a new podcaster, like how do they reach this level?
Yeah. So when I started, right, like there's some people when they start, like they may have like I didn't really know that many podcasting people when I started. It would like, especially like the people that I'm like friends with now, or like, cool with now in terms of who I used to listen to. It's kind of crazy. The people that I used to like listen to and be like, oh my gosh, like I actually know them, right? Like we actually hang out a little bit in terms of in the personal finance space. It's kind of crazy. So I'd say that strategy for growing a podcast in particular is going to be a couple things. In the beginning, like I did care a lot about if I got maybe a more popular guest, because like I'm like, oh, I hope they share this with their audience, because that will help. And nowadays, like I don't care as much. Like if I had popular guests on and they have not shared it at all, because I'm no longer focused on that. So I think in the beginning, you may have to be a little bit more strategic in terms of guests and hoping that they share it with their audiences, whatever that looks like, so that you can gain more listeners, but also connecting with other podcasters, because the thing about podcasting is so many people like still don't really understand it or know what it is. Like I'm always surprised, like even though like my podcast does well, like on the scale of like comparing it to like the top podcast, it's like a little fish, but then I know that my podcast compared to like the podcasts that want to get to where I am feel like little fish. So it's all like levels to it. But it's really like connecting and like so podcast listeners, once you're like, you can get other podcast listeners who like, and not have to convert them to podcast listeners. That helps. So like,
Okay.
there's like the podcast listener audience, and there are people who have no clue and are going to maybe be podcast listeners. And so the easiest thing to go after first are people who are used to podcasts. So that's like going on other podcasts, and having people with an audience share your show with their, if they have a podcast with their audience. And then I think the real kind of push, I think that if you can do this is really helpful, is opening up a door for people who are not podcast listeners or who are not into the subject matter that you are talking about. Not that they're not into it, but they've never thought of it that way. So I get a lot of people who listen to my podcast and they're just like, I never even considered any of this. Like, this is all new to me. And like, you're making me interested in this, like for the first time. Or so I think that's exciting. And that's what helps in terms of strategy, because after a certain while, the content and how you resonate with your audience has to stand on its own, because they're going to tell people. It's literally word of mouth, which can take a while. It's like a slow burn sometimes, but like the word of mouth, I think is really where it's at. And again, it can take some time. Of course, like the big media hits help, like Apple Podcasts featuring me in February. My downloads, like they increased between 20 and 40%, depending on the day from the previous weeks. That's a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that helped. Right. So I'm not going to discount getting featured and all that other stuff, but really it's the content. Like, you need a person getting into your stuff and sharing it with someone in their life. And I would say this, the most amazing kind of way in which I knew that the podcast was resonating with people was I got a comment. I think someone said, oh, I found your podcast because I was talking to someone online at Banana Republic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I posted this on my Instagram. I should share it again, but she said she was talking to her friend online at Banana Republic, and the cashier about money, like here I go again, or something like that. And the cashier said to her, "You should listen to Journey to Launch," which blew my mind. So, because right, and so she had shared that with me, like this cashier at Banana Republic told her to listen to the podcast. So I shared that on my Instagram, and no lie, the cashier happened to be like follow me on Instagram too, saw that and said, I'm the cashier. I told her to listen. And then that person responded to her. And so I think about that, where like, that's the kind of like content you want to create, where people want to share it, like, and want to like tell their friends and their coworkers about it. And then I think your growth will be inevitable, even if no big publication picks it up, which eventually they will, because then you'll be so undeniable at that point. But it's really the content and what you're doing and who you're connecting with that really makes your platform grow.
I think that's the piece that a lot of people don't think about. I feel like it's actually about who you're inspiring and just being true to them. Like, whether it's listeners or in my case, like students, like if I focus on making sure that my students are doing well, then they will tell my story. Like, you don't have to go out and advertise as much as long as you focus on providing really good content to the people that you're serving. And I feel like sometimes that's missed. So I'm so glad that you said that. And then I do have another question for you, just switching gears a little bit, but how do you keep from getting a big head when you see things like that? All these people listening and them sharing your story at Banana Republic, like, how do you stay humble?
Okay, I think that's an interesting question, because one, I can actually do a little bit better at having a bigger head. I think I don't give myself
Okay.
enough credit. Like, honestly, like I'm really hard on myself when it comes to the content and podcasts, right? And I think like, it's a difference in being like, I am always grateful. I think that's another thing, like why my journeyers, my listeners like my stuff, because they know like I'm like always like happy, like someone's listening. Anytime I get a response, I'm like, oh, like I'm not just talking to myself in my kitchen, like you guys are here. So that feels really like good. So I think just remembering one, like how far I've come is helpful, but then not to get tripped up with the whole like, because I think so many of us do a disservice to ourselves by not giving ourselves enough credit. Like, I thought the other day, like, it's great when people compliment my podcast and what's going on, but I should be able to tell myself the same thing and feel just as good or better. Like, it's almost like it's great to get external feedback. It validates you, but I think internally you need to create a system and way for yourself to feel good. Like, it shouldn't take someone else to tell you that, like you're beautiful. It feels good when someone says it, but you should be able to look in the mirror and tell that to yourself, right? And to have that confidence, because I think so many people don't have the confidence, like to go after their goals, to put themselves out there, because of, they're afraid of what people will think or who they might become in the process. And like, I think actually having a bigger head, but being still nice person is helpful, especially as an entrepreneur. You have to think that you're good or you're not going to survive.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. It's true. Like, I think what, like reiterating what you said, but just from my perspective, I think what keeps me humble is knowing that, like, I wouldn't have any of this by myself. Like, I know that, like, I'm a big believer in God. I feel like without the Lord, I would have nothing. So I know that, like, all glory goes to him. Like, I think that's what keeps me humble. But then I do know, like, I have that confidence. Like, I'm gifted. Like, I have a special set of skill sets that the world needs to see. And like, I'm thankful that he created me like this. So you have to have some confidence behind you of like, you know what, I got this.
Yeah, you know what? As you were talking, I thought of something because I think it's that fine line. Because I always say, like, in one moment, like I'm like my biggest fan. Like, I'm like, yo, you like Oprah. Why has not Oprah called you yet? I don't understand. That's me on one hand, and then the other hand, I'm just like, oh my gosh, like you can't, like, you pronounce things wrong, like your voice, like. So I think there's a fine line which helps me be humble or helps me want to create better stuff and content. Not that it's like the best self-talk, but there's another part of me that feels like, come on, like, so I think that balance, I'm able to walk that line really well on when I need to like use it to push me to do better or use it to be like you got this.
Yeah. And you know what? I think sometimes we think that our like I don't know, like our weaknesses, sometimes we think that those are going to be bigger than they are, and we don't realize that they're actually strengths. So like, I think I heard you kind of almost say your voice, and I know, like, for a long time for me, I was like, my voice, nobody's going to want to hear my voice. Like, my voice is like so small, and people say it sounds like a baby. But do you know that it's actually one of my strengths? Like, when people hear me, they're like, oh, that was you, Teri. I know by your voice. Like, it's unique. And it's something for me I was afraid of. So yeah, some of those things, like,
I relate to that a lot because
yeah,
some people will specifically say, like, I love your voice, or you have a podcasting voice. I'm like, really? Like, so really, we are usually our harshest critics, and so a lot of it is just like, I always say, I just tell that person to shut up. Like, people see me doing things and they're just like, I don't know how you do it. I'm like, I don't know either. I just do it. I don't. And that's really what it is. Like,
Now, we didn't get to talk as much about mindsets. We said it, but we didn't talk about it. So, what are some things that you would say about mindsets that people need to have to reach this level?
so mindset, honestly, it's tried and true. Like, it's just not giving up. Like, it's really being persistent. Like, you will get turned down, you will get denied, or the opportunities may not be for you. There will be failures. You'll launch something and it will be a dud, or you won't sell it the way you thought you would. Like, all that is going to happen. And really, it's just like, you have to keep going. You have to learn what you can from that lesson. And so I find that, like, the growth mindset of believing you can learn anything, right? So if you don't think you're good at something, but you're like, well, I'll either learn it or have someone help me or hire someone. Like, I'm going to figure it out. I'm not going to let me not understanding this concept, and this works with finance too, stop me from like getting into this. And then, so the growth mindset and being persistent about not stopping is super, super key. And I would say, like, for me, it's also making sure I'm in a good headspace, like mentally and emotionally. Because if I'm not, then then everything, if you wake up on the wrong side of the bed or you're not in a good mood, then everything kind of just goes downhill. So it's really like setting up yourself for success by focusing on and creating an environment where you can be successful, whatever that looks like. Physically, like working in a physical space that makes you feel good, listening to things that make you feel good, reading things that make you feel good, staying away from things that don't make you feel good. Like, that is key in terms of fuel for your like mindset and getting things done.
Have you ever had to podcast when you didn't feel good? Like, how did you push through that?
Yeah, definitely. Especially when I was still working. So when I was working, I was like doing the podcast more like every day when I came home at night, especially when I was pregnant. And a lot of times, like, I was just like tired, like I was over it. With stuff like that, I just pushed through it because I knew that I needed to get it done. I didn't really have an option. Sometimes when you have your back against the wall that way, especially when I knew that I wanted to quit my job, like you just do what you have to do. And so, nowadays I'm able to kind of batch the podcast more in terms of recording. So that's helpful because then I know I can prepare. Okay, you have like a full day of podcasting interviews coming up. But it's literally just like knowing that a lot of times things are how I'm feeling. If it's negative, it's temporary. And so not letting that temporary feeling like ruin or mess up the whole like experience or day or what I'm doing.
I love that. And I've heard somebody say that before. Like, you have so many minutes in a day. How you feel, like if something bad happens, that took up maybe 10 of the bajillion minutes that you had. So don't let that small amount of time mess up all the rest of your time. So that is so true. And then I've had a couple people on here say, like, one person says, do you procrastinate? Another person had asked, like, about your day. So can you walk us through, like, how do you structure your time to make sure that you're able to do it all?
Yeah, so I've gotten better this year about being more organized. I usually am not like a fan of planners, like writing things down. Like I'm more of like, I love being like, I'll just figure it out, like kind of free spirit kind of way. But then I realized like I do need like to understand what my goals are for the day. So that way I don't feel like by the end of it, I haven't done anything. So I did start using like a planner to help me do that. I used a full focus planner by with Michael Hyatt. There's tons of planners out there, but so far this system is working for me. That helps. So I know kind of like what I need to do for the day. The other thing that I've been kind of playing around with is actually doing not a lot of non-related work things or not spending as much time like in front of my computer. It's like doing other things. So for example, I joined the gym beginning of this year because one of my goals is to get back in shape and be healthy. And so at first that kind of seems like, well, that has nothing to do with your business, but it does because like I feel so much better like after I work out and I feel so much more invigorated. Like, this tempo that I'm in, like I know like I'm getting back to the, Jamila I was before the kids. That feels good. And that makes me have more energy for my work. So it's oftentimes sometimes slowing down to speed up or taking pauses or not going as hard like as I was going where I was stressing myself out, when I had like a full-time job. It's really about what do I need to accomplish? And then understanding that honestly, mindset part of it is and faith is part of this where my train is going forward regardless. I don't think there's going to be one project or thing or singular event that's going to throw it off or not make my train like go and ruin it or take it off the tracks. With that kind of feeling, knowing that like my success is inevitable, like it really like doesn't matter. Like the day-to-day stuff, like it matters, but it doesn't. So if I was going to do something, but something else came up or something didn't go so right or well, like that helps me focus and recenter and realize like that's just a small part of this big puzzle of life. It's not a big deal. Your train's moving forward anyway. So that helps me in terms of just like mindset about like reaching the goals that I have.
Oh my goodness, I love that. My success is inevitable. Everybody needs to write that in the chat. Like just say it out loud. Like my success is inevitable. Do you have any other money affirmations that I'd say money affirmations or just general life affirmations that you have?
Yeah, not there's like a bunch, but I would say like the thought patterns that I try to stick with are like things don't happen to me, they happen for me. Like I like even if it doesn't seem like every single thing in my life, even at the point where I thought like why or this is like a negative thing, it's helping to to set me up for something else. No matter what. And I challenge a lot of people to think that because maybe you're in a situation that's not the best even with your finances, like you're just like, oh, I made this mistake. I don't have this or my job, whatever it is. Like there's a lesson, there's something to be learned or taken that literally the next part of your journey you'll need. And if not for that moment, like you wouldn't have had. So I try to use that when things don't go my way or like even when I want something and it doesn't happen, I'm like, no, there's a bigger thing. There's a reason for that.
That's good. So y'all catch that other one? She also said, things don't happen to me, they happen for me. Because you can learn from every single thing. And here, let me make this small comment and then Jamila, I want you to share with them like how they can get in touch with you. But I went to Oprah. Did you go to Oprah's tour?
I did not.
Oh
I'm
my
going to
goodness.
invite me as a special guest. No. But
Right, she is, because you know what, your success is inevitable. So we just waiting for that call. When she calls you, please tell me so I can come sit in the audience. I just want to watch. I'm just saying. Because I want to get called too, but you know what? I'm okay supporting first. I'm gonna come support you, and then I'm gonna get called. Okay. But one of the things she said, and here, let me make sure I can say it right. But she said, stress is when you want the moment to be something that it's not. So I'm gonna say that one more time. She said, stress is when you want the moment to be something that it's not. So she said the way to not be stressed is to accept what the moment is and then figure out what you're going to do. So, and I thought that was revolutionary. And it kind of, when you said the things don't happen to me, they happen for me, it just made me think of that quote from her too. Like, a lot of times we get stressed out and we get anxiety and we go overwhelmed because we want the moment to be something that is not. And whether that's you want to be on time but you not because you late, like, like we want it to be something that is not. Even relationships, like you want it to be, you know, rainbows and sugar cakes, but it's not. Like that's when we get stressed out. But when we start accepting things for what they are, then we can figure out, okay, this is what it is right now. Like, yes, I'm late to this podcast. Yes, the internet didn't work. Yes, like this is what it is. Now what are we going to do? And you just push and move forward. Like that's when you can actually make some things happen.
Yeah, I think I love that you brought that up because then your response to that usually really is key. Like, so when things are not working out for you, how do you respond? When you get disappointed, when the moment is not what you thought it would be, how do you respond? Are you wallowing in that? Are you complaining? Do you have a negative response? And I give people space, like, to have their feelings, right? So I'm not ever going to say you shouldn't feel the way you feel, but I always challenge people to think, okay, but depending on how you respond can actually be what's all part of your process to get to the next point. Like I remember there's some things like maybe so with my money, when I got featured in Money magazine, like it was actually supposed to be in the print. And I remember I spent a lot of time with the writer in terms of on the phone and giving her my information. And I remember she emailed me and she was like, so we spent like a couple weeks and I'm giving her all this information. And then she emailed me and like, oh, they kind of changed directions. They're not going to use my piece anymore. And so like, I was like, okay, disappointed, but like, I was just like, thank you so much, like for taking the time. Like this was amazing anyway. I think my response to her, and then like, I think a week later, or maybe even less than that, she emailed me and was just like, oh, well, we're able to now put it in on the website. And I would say like getting that feature, like was the first time our website crashed. I don't really get, like that's never happened to me. So I'm not sure if it was my response to her or whatever, what that was. Right. But if I would have took it from like a negative place or not responded or showed gratitude, who knows, like if I would have got that opportunity. Things like that recently it still happened to me where I know it seems like if you follow me and if you even just learning about myself now, you might be like, oh, like, well, everything just like works out. Like she's just doing it all. And like, there are a lot of behind the scene things that don't work out that, like I literally get passed up for and whatever. And I'm just like, nope, there's something else. Like it's okay. So I want to share that testimony too.
Yeah. And you know what? And I know, guys, we're going over a little bit. If you have to jump off, the replay will be featured so you can listen to the replay. But it's so true. I think timing is everything. There's been some times where I've been passed up on things and then it comes back around and you're like, I'm so thankful that it didn't work out the first time. Like now that it's come back around, like I'm more prepared. They have a bigger audience. Like it happens at the right time. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't try for things, but when it does happen, it'll be right.
Right. Exactly.
That's so true. Oh, well, thank you guys so much for joining with us. And thank you so much, Jamila, for joining. Please let them know, how do they get in touch with you?
Okay, awesome. So I'm on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook as Journey to Launch. So I started typing that. So Journey to Launch on Instagram. And then the podcast. So if you are not a podcast, it's funny because I'm just like, if you have an Apple phone and you're not a podcast listener, you have a purple app, there's a P on your phone that you can really like, podcasts are free, by the way. Like I'm just like, this is like a free, well, it's not a P, but it says podcast. It's that purple app right here on your phone. If you have an iPhone, you can like click on that, type in Journey to Launch, find the podcast and subscribe. And if you don't have Apple Podcasts, fine. If you have an Android, you can, if you do listen to podcasts, just search for Journey to Launch, or you can go to journeytolaunch.com/Android to find out what app to listen to it on. And then journeytolaunch.com. So I do have some, like, if you go to that site, you'll have some options. Like I do have like a free email course. So if you want to personally get your finances like started and together, that's a good start, along with listening to the podcast and then following me on social media. And then, you'll get into the mix, and you're a journeyer, and then we'll start from there.
Someone said, "Are you on YouTube?"
I actually am on YouTube. So just search Journey to Launch. My podcasts aren't, but it's not, I haven't done too many visual podcasts. About two of them have been like recorded for YouTube. And I have a video series as well. So if you follow me on Journey to Launch at Instagram, you'll see some of the stuff I do. And if you're local to New York, I'm on News 12 here also, talking about finances every week.
Nice. Well, thank you so much, Jamila. And you guys know that we're doing this series. This actually was the third one for February. We were doing this Power of 1 Million series, but we've gotten like such a great response. We've extended it. So we'll be putting out the roster of people for next month, but it's going to continue. There's like three more speakers coming up next month for March, all millionaires that have reached millions of things, both money and people. So, guys, like, thank you guys so much for supporting us. Please tell your friends, and then we will see you next week.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.